What if I told you that a few lines drawn on a map in California could decide who controls Congress and whether a president could be impeached? Or that one federal judge's decision could determine whether hundreds of thousands of people are allowed to stay in the country they call home? These aren't hypotheticals. These are legal decisions happening right now, and they affect all of us, whether we realize it or not. This is Wahl on Law. Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Wahl on Law. My name is Jonas Wahl, and I am a sophomore at the University of Delaware, majoring in political science, criminal justice, and sociology. I created this podcast because every week there are major legal updates that affect our lives, but as a college student, I never really understood what those changes meant for me. A lot of law podcasts do a great job explaining the law itself, but they don't always explain how the law actually shows up in everyday life, especially for students, young people, and people who aren't lawyers. Law on Law is about closing that gap and breaking down what the law means for you. In today's episode, we are covering two major legal updates. First, we are going to cover a Supreme Court decision involving congressional maps in California. Then, we will turn to immigration and a federal judge's decision that affects hundreds of thousands of Haitian immigrants living in the United States. Let's start with the Supreme Court. This past Wednesday, February 4th, the Supreme Court allowed California to move forward with a new electoral map that could give Democrats 5 more congressional seats. That might sound technical or even boring at first, but to understand why this matters, we need to break it down. An electoral map is how a state groups voters together to decide who gets elected to Congress. States with larger populations have more districts because they have more people to represent. Each district is supposed to have roughly the same number of people, but populations change, and peoples also move between states, cities grow, and neighborhoods shift. When that happens, district boundaries have to be redrawn, a process known as redistricting. Let's take Maryland as a quick example. Maryland has about 6 million people and 8 congressional districts, meaning each district represents roughly 750,000 residents. California works the same exact way. It just has a lot more people. With nearly 40 million residents, California has 52 congressional districts, the most out of any state. Right now, California's House of Representatives is split with 43 Democrats, 8 Republicans, and 1 vacant seat. Under the new Supreme Court approved map, Democrats are projected to gain up to 5 additional seats, and if Democrats were to flip all 5 Republican-held seats that the map is intended to create, California's delegation would shift to 48 Democrats and 3 Republicans with 1 vacant seat. This happens because the new map changes which voters are grouped together, making it easier for Democrats to win more districts. In a closely divided House of Representatives, changes like this can play a major role in deciding which party holds power. But you might be asking the question, why did this redistricting rise all the way to the Supreme Court? Let's take a step back. This case did not start at the Supreme Court. Instead, it started with Republican plaintiffs, including Republican voters and party officials in California, filing a lawsuit in Los Angeles. The plaintiffs, backed by the Trump administration, claimed that the map used race, especially by strengthening Latino voting influence, in a way that favored Democrats. The Los Angeles federal court rejected the Republican plaintiffs' request, so they appealed the decision, and the case ultimately reached the Supreme Court, which is the nation's highest court. Now, there's another term that more clearly explains what the Republican plaintiffs are arguing, and this term comes up a lot when we're talking about redistricting: gerrymandering. More specifically, there's a term called partisan gerrymandering. Partisan gerrymandering is when political parties draw voting maps to help their own party win more seats, even if voters don't actually change their preferences. Now, legally, the challenge focused on racial gerrymandering, but the political effect and the real-world impact is clearly partisan. That's essentially what the Republicans were arguing in this case. They claimed that California's redistricting was not driven by population changes, but by the use of race, in a way that they claimed would advantage Democratic candidates. The Trump administration stated that exact same concern. In a brief filed by the Solicitor General, the government argued that California's redistricting was, quote, tainted by an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Now, another interesting aspect of this case is that when the Supreme Court gave its official ruling, they did not offer an explanation as to why they ruled in favor of California. That's because this decision came through an emergency application. When a case is time sensitive, like this one, with midterms elections less than 9 months away, the court can step in quickly without giving a full written opinion. So when we don't get detailed reasoning, that does not mean the decision came out of nowhere. But where did this decision come from then? Well, a huge part of constitutional law is precedent. Precedent means that courts generally follow the legal principles or outcomes of prior similar cases, and there is significant precedent supporting this ruling. In December, just a few months ago, President Trump supported a redistricting effort in Texas. Before his proposed redistricting, Texas's House delegation included 25 Republicans and 13 Democrats. Under the new map, Republicans are projected to gain 5 additional seats, potentially shifting their House delegation to about 30 Republicans and 8 Democrats. Just like California, that Texas map was also challenged and was ultimately allowed to go into effect, with the Supreme Court allowing it to be used for 2026. Now, I am telling you about this ruling to show you that California's redistricting did not come out of nowhere, and there was precedent. Once the Supreme Court allowed Texas to redraw its map in a way that clearly benefited Republicans, California's map followed that same legal path. California's redistricting did not just follow precedent. It came right after the Supreme Court allowed Texas to redraw its map first. Even though redistricting is supposed to be nonpartisan, in today's political climate, it's usually not. Both parties are increasingly using redistricting to protect or gain House control. Now, as I promised you earlier, let's get to why all of this matters. Right now, the House of Representatives is extremely divided. There are 218 Republican representatives to 214 Democratic representatives, with 3 vacant seats. If Democrats gain the potential seats with California's new map after the election, that alone could be enough to flip control of the House, which could shift the House delegation to 219 Democratic representatives and 213 Republican representatives. If Democrats control the House, any legislation that President Trump wants to pass becomes much harder to move forward. But even more importantly, the Constitution gives the House the sole power to impeach. That means if Democrats hold a House majority, which only requires 218 Democratic representatives, they would likely have the votes necessary to impeach President Trump without needing any Republican support. Full removal would still require a 2/3 vote in the Senate, but impeachment itself only requires a simple House majority. And that's why redistricting, electoral maps, and Supreme Court decisions like this one matter way more than just lines on a map. They directly shape who holds power in Washington, and ultimately, who holds power over us. Before we move on to our second topic, here is an interesting piece of context. In U.S. history, only 3 sitting presidents have ever been impeached, and none were ultimately convicted by the Senate. Those presidents were Andrew Johnson in 1868, Bill Clinton in 1998, and Donald Trump, who was impeached twice in 2019 and again in 2021. Our second major legal update also centers on the Trump administration. This time, we are dealing with immigration. For those who don't know, President Trump has taken a very tough stance against immigration, with enforcement carried out nationwide by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, often referred to as ICE. Immigration enforcement has been a key part of his presidency, particularly through efforts aimed at expanding deportations. On Tuesday, February 3rd, a federal judge temporarily blocked the Trump administration from ending legal protections for Haitians living in the United States. Specifically, this ruling ended protections for Haitian immigrants. The judge ruled that the administration could not revoke their temporary protected status, at least for now. If these protections had been removed, roughly 350,000 Haitians living in the United States could have faced deportation. As with everything we cover on Wahl on Law, let's break down what this means and why it matters. First, let's talk about the term Temporary Protected Status, or TPS. TPS offers work authorization and deportation protections for individuals in the U.S. who cannot safely return to their home countries, and is granted by the Homeland Security Secretary. While TPS allows individuals to live and work legally in the United States, it's important to understand that it does not provide a pathway to permanent residency or citizenship. TPS is meant to be temporary, and it must be renewed by the federal government. Haitians were first granted TPS in 2010 after a massive earthquake killed hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed their country's infrastructure. Since then, TPS for Haitians has been extended multiple times, not just because of that earthquake, but also because the country is still very unstable with widespread gang violence, food shortages, and public health crises. For many Haitians living in the United States, TPS has meant that they can build their life, legally work, raise families, and contribute to their communities, while their home country is still very unsafe. The Trump administration has moved to terminate that protection due to its widespread effort to expand deportations. While this case focuses mainly on Haitians, it's important to understand that this is part of a much larger pattern. Under Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, the administration has also moved to end TPS and other immigration protections for large numbers of people from multiple countries, including Venezuela, Nicaragua, Nepal, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Cameroon, but many of those decisions are now being challenged in court. Returning back to Haiti, the Department of Homeland Security has argued that conditions in Haiti have improved enough to justify ending TPS, but many Haitians strongly disagree with them, arguing that violence has intensified. Basic services have collapsed, and large portions of the country are still unstable. It is this disagreement over country conditions that is being debated upon. Now, it's important to understand about what this judge's ruling does and what it does not do. The court did not permanently restore or guarantee TPS for Haitians. Instead, the judge granted a request to pause the termination. That means Haitian TPS holders are protected for now, but the issue is far from resolved. The case could continue through the courts. The administration could appeal, and future rulings could still allow TPS to be ended down the line. So for the moment, Haitian immigrants with TPS can legally stay and work in the United States, but the uncertainty remains, and that uncertainty has real consequences for families, employers, schools, and entire communities. And this brings us back to the bigger picture. This is the part that matters for you. Just like redistricting, immigration law is not just about policy debates in Washington. It affects real people, real families, and real lives. Court decisions like this one don't just interpret the law. They determine who gets to stay, who has to leave, and who gets to live without fear. For students, workers, and families trying to plan their futures, these rulings shape everything from employment to education to stability. And that's exactly why these legal updates matter. Before we wrap up, let's quickly recap what we covered today. First, we looked at the Supreme Court's decision to allow California to use a new electoral map. We broke down what electoral maps and redistricting actually are, why population matters, and how redrawing district lines can shift political power in Congress. In California's case, that shift could mean 5 additional Democratic seats in the House, enough to potentially flip control of the chamber. And as we talked about, that does not just affect legislation, it affects impeachment power and the balance of power in Washington. Then we moved to our second legal update, focusing on immigration and temporary protected status. A federal judge temporarily blocked the Trump administration from ending TPS for Haitian immigrants, protecting roughly 350,000 people from immediate deportation. We talked about what TPS is, why Haitians were granted it in the first place, and how this case fits into a wider effort by the administration to remove protections for immigrants from multiple countries. While the ruling offers temporary relief, the future of TPS for Haitians and many others remains uncertain. What connects both of these stories is this: legal decisions that might seem abstract or technical at first glance can have massive, real-world consequences. Whether it's who controls Congress, or whether families can safely stay in the country they call home, the law shapes people's lives in very real ways. And that's exactly what Wahl on Law is about. Taking complex legal updates and breaking down what the law actually means for you. Before we close out, I want to say thank you for listening to the very first episode of Wahl on Law. If you found this episode helpful, or if it even helped make the law feel a little more understandable, that's exactly the goal of this podcast. In future episodes, we will continue to break down major legal and political developments, whether that's Supreme Court cases, legislation, or executive actions, and focusing on how those decisions affect everyday people, especially students. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe to Wahl on Law so you don't miss future updates. You can also find episode summaries, sources, and more information at wahlonlaw.com. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Wahl on Law.